Prime Minister Modi's foreign affairs warrior. The minister who cemented G20 victory speaks first on India Today.
There are good reasons to be satisfied.
Dr. S. Jaishankar exclusive on NewsTrack.
Hello and welcome. The G20 summit is being seen as a big diplomatic win for India. And I am delighted to be joined at this moment on India Today by one of the key architects of India's diplomatic win, India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar. Dr. Jaishankar, welcome and congratulations on a job well done.
Well, thank you and good to be here with you.
Your book is titled The India Way Strategies for an Uncertain World. And during India's G20 presidency, we saw a lot of those strategies come into play in this uncertain world as you showed the rest of the countries the India way. In India's journey as a country moving from being a middle power to a world power, how significant do you think the Delhi Declaration is?
I think it's very significant, Rahul, because for a variety of reasons. One, the G20 itself is the premier global forum today. More so when we see the UN completely gridlocked, when in fact many other groupings are either divided or shall I say not functional. So this is actually in a way the coming together of the top 20 countries of the world. Now added to that we called another 9, so you can say roughly the top 30 countries of the world, 14 international organizations. So there were 43 people around the table. Now it was significant because in a way it was a test, if you could look at it that way, of our ability to really shape the global agenda. To say that look, at this time, in our view, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are the pressing issues, and in our view, that's really what the premier forum should be discussing. So to the extent that we actually got the G20 to focus on the global south, to look at today's world and its problems in a particular way, I would say that in itself was one achievement. The second was, it's a very polarized world. It's very polarized, you can say east-west. It's also very divided north-south. It's not just the Ukraine conflict. I think the COVID pandemic has really wreaked havoc on the international system, and there are other issues. I mean, there are fundamental issues about the inequity of the current global order. So here is India, you have an east-west issue, you have a north-south issue. So it was also in some ways a test of our ability to forge a consensus, to find a common landing point. And then it was for ourselves, you could say a self-imposed or a self-set way of testing ourselves, that today, in the past we've always done any gathering in a very kind of sarkari, bureaucratic way. Can we do it differently? Can we take it out to the rest of the country? Can we link it to what is happening in societies? Can we make people feel that yes, this is an event or a responsibility in which I too have some connection? And I think in terms therefore of the agenda, in terms of the bridge building, in terms of the manner in which it was done, I think each one of them was a significant step forward to us. So certainly to me, Indian foreign policy or Indian diplomacy post G20 looks, I mean, I would say there are good reasons to be satisfied with it.
In each of the ministerial meetings that happened since India's G20 presidency began, there was lack of consensus, largely on account of the Russia-Ukraine war and how those words should be framed. Were you apprehensive that at the end of the G20 summit there may be no joint communique, as was being widely feared in many capitals, that it will be just too much, the gaps are too many to bridge? The Indian opposition in any case was waiting to pronounce the G20 a big failure?
Well, look, I would say the way we handled it was from the very start to tell the G20 and you know, or to make them all accept this, which is wherever we get agreement, let's lock that in, you know. So we didn't want a situation where, let us say, out of 30 paras you didn't agree on 2, so you lost all 30 paragraphs. So you sort of said, okay, I give you an example. I myself chaired the development ministers meeting. Now we all agreed, all of us, all 20 of us, that the sustainable development goals had fallen you know, well behind. It was a source of enormous global anxiety. So if we could lock that in, and we did it as a standalone document. Similarly, the idea that, you know, the idea of a lifestyle for sustainability. Everybody said, okay, I mean, we understand it, we buy it, we like it, we lock that in. So our approach was, therefore, what you could get unanimity about, lock that in, where you couldn't, in a sense, keep trying meeting after meeting after meeting to narrow that divide. And I think in retrospect it was a sensible strategy, because what it did was it left us in the last, let's say, 2 weeks to the summit a relatively limited number of issues, of which of course the Ukraine, the geopolitical paragraph, as they say, was among the most problematic. Now here too, you know, one part of me said, yes, look, we've isolated the issue, let's work it through. But it wasn't just a question of, you know, finding the right words and, shall I say, finessing it with good language. What was happening in the real world, if you would, was also that at various levels, you know, the Sherpa and the Sherpa's team were talking, I was talking to my counterparts, at certain points of play where required, you know, Prime Minister himself came in. So we also knew that, you know, in many ways, a lot of countries were invested in the G20. They were invested in the presidency of the G20, in the current presidency of the G20. And that gave me a lot of confidence that, look, at the end of the day, there would be a desire on everybody's part to find a landing ground. So, I mean, I always believed that we would get it done. The question was, I mean, that doesn't mean it happens on its own. The last few days, I think, were particularly, in a sense, challenging. But there were some things we did which were very useful. You know, Prime Minister, for example, in the middle of, I mean, on the eve of G20, actually made a half-a-day trip to Indonesia. Okay, he flew overnight, reached Indonesia, spent a few hours, took up, you know, and then came back. Now the impact of that was, if, you know, the others got the message that here was a Prime Minister willing to put himself out for the success of somebody else's event. Now it generates naturally at the leadership level that sense that, look, if he is willing to do it for others, you know, we also need to reciprocate. We need to back him up. You know, both before the G20 and actually at that meeting, including the day, the morning when we finally got the conclusion. There were still issues which needed to be resolved, and in some cases I, you know, had to ask him, saying, you know, it'd be good if you could speak to your counterpart, and
he did that?
Yes, he did that. So
do you think his stature has gone up in the eyes of the world as India's voice on the global stage as a result of this declaration?
I mean, I can put it both ways. I think the declaration also happened because his stature had gone up. Yeah. When he sort of brought up the issue with some of his counterparts, the fact that this was Prime Minister Modi himself bringing up the issue, I think definitely had an impact on his counterparts. And then, see, typically what happens is they then tell the people saying, okay, look, make a harder effort, find some fix. So this was happening at multiple levels.
Minister, the Delhi Declaration has been criticized by a few for toning down the language of the Russia-Ukraine war, saying that, references to Russian aggression have been done away with, and in some senses this is a bit of a cop-out given what we're seeing in Ukraine at this moment. How do you explain or justify that?
No, I first of all, I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a cop-out. In fact, I think the people who are putting it that way are not understanding really what is happening in the world, and I'll explain to you why. Look, the first thing is, we had a formulation which was circa November 2022 at Bali. Now, haven't things changed after that? I mean, has time stood still? Are we exactly in September 2023 where we were in November 22? Of course we are not. So now tell me, if we are to do a cut and paste of Bali, if your entire analysis is, so there is Bali, where is the, what is it you have changed, and that becomes a plus or a minus exercise. I think it's lazy. I think it's very mechanical. It also ignores what has happened since then. And most of all, and this is very fundamental to us, look at actually what are the new issues which have been flagged. So let me give you an understanding of what it is which we did this time. If you see the fundamental, I would say the core concept of our core agenda of our G20, it was really about the global south. Now the Ukraine conflict has directly impacted the global south. So that didn't come through in Bali. Now tell me, a year after that, given food shortages, given inflation, given energy shortages, given the impact it has had on economies across the developing world, don't you think in fairness we needed to reflect that? So the idea that we should, just do a cut and paste and stick with exactly what was Bali, I think would have been an enormous, not just disservice, I think it would have been a huge disappointment to 130 countries in the world. Now I'll give you a second example. What is a crucial issue today? The Black Sea grain corridor. Okay, the fact that, that worked and now it's not working, should that not have been included? Okay. Let me give you a third example. There are today concerns that the infrastructure which delivers on food or fertilizer, that is being attacked. Should that not be included in this? So, to my mind, actually, and in fact, I can even add a fourth one. We've had, even in the last few weeks, meetings about finding a way out on Ukraine. There was a meeting in Copenhagen. There was a meeting in Saudi Arabia and Jeddah. There have been other discussions. So if countries since Bali, if they've been trying for a way out, should that not be recognized? So I would then ask a counter question. If the entire purpose of that exercise is to carry everything mechanically through, do a cut and paste from Bali to here, then that's like saying that, I'm really not taking cognizance of dialogue. I attach no importance to food security, or the Black Sea grain corridor doesn't matter to me. Now, that's not the view of the majority of countries. So we had to find a different set of words and different formulations, which is why I said, look, Bali was Bali. Delhi is Delhi.
I'm very curious, does the G20 now officially become the G21? Does the name change?
Well, I'm not quite sure how that works.
If you are not sure, then how is anybody supposed to be sure?
Meaning, what happened was, in a sense, G20, yes, it's 20 countries, but G20 has also become a brand.
Okay.
I would say we will discover whether now that the African Union has joined as a permanent member, exactly what people call it. This G20 did not address that question.
Why was the inclusion of the African Union into the G20 such a key priority for the Modi government? How is India's approach to countries in Africa likely to be different from what China has been doing? Because over the last 2 decades, they've been building deep linkages, which has left a lot of African countries in deep debt. So how is our approach likely to be different, Minister?
Well, two issues here. What is our approach to Africa? Second approach, why is it important Africa be included in the G20? Let me take the second one. It's been talked about for some time. It's not a new issue. And even at Bali, the African Union chair, Senegal, tried very hard, but people didn't have the bandwidth at that time to look at it. Now, we felt very early on that we should put this on the agenda. Why did we feel that? Variety of reasons. One, part of it is, you can say, the solidarity of the developing world, of the decolonized world, that our feeling for each other is very much stronger. The second, that if you look, here I'm talking particularly of the Modi government and Prime Minister Modi personally, he has a very strong belief, conviction in the philosophy of no one left behind. Okay, no one left behind, even in terms of our own country, our own society. So if you look at everything that we've done over the last 10 years, a large part of it is make sure in food, in financial inclusion, in housing, in health, that in Kisan, in Saman Nidhi. So the whole idea of an inclusive India where people get their fair share of support. Now, if that's your fundamental conviction cannot stop at your borders. It's then a worldview. So if you feel that, let us say, an aspirational district has been left behind in India, or a community has been left behind, or a demography has been left behind, it applies equally in international affairs. And from the very beginning, he's always had that view that, look, we need to go the extra mile where Africa is concerned.
And there seems to be good feedback in African countries.
Yes, absolutely. So what we did was, we did those initial soundings. Okay, so we asked people saying, look, folks, this been on the agenda, should we do something? And, it's in the nature of these kind of platforms that nobody differs, but nobody quite belts the cat. So I think Prime Minister decided he would do it. So he then, some months ago, wrote to the other 19 leaders saying, in my view, this should be done. And please let me know if you agree with me. So I think I give him that credit, that in a way he forced the issue, that he put it on the table. And the nature of the issue was such, there was really nobody who would have opposed it. But it's just that nobody made an effort to do it. Maybe Mr. Modi's sort of sense of social justice is much stronger.
Are you hoping this triggers a move towards reforming the United Nations Security Council? Because we've got it done for somebody else, and now others should also get the message.
I don't think, no. That's a kind of a, I know you don't mean it that way, but it should not look, this wasn't done as a transaction. Okay, this was done because it was the right thing to do. Now, if by doing the right thing, you also encourage others to do a right thing, there's no harm in that. I mean, after all, in a slightly different context, we also took the lead in the expansion of the BRICS. That when it came to the BRICS expansion, it was India which actually had the largest list of potential nominees which we backed, and we succeeded in sort of pretty much getting every one of them in. So that's one part of it. The second part of, the other part of the question, what is our policy towards Africa, I think came out in the G20, which is Africa today requires special care. It requires, the rest of the world to do much more than it's doing. We tried to do it in different ways. And we've always taken the view that, look, with Africa, the development partnership will be based on the priorities of Africa. So today, if you go to Africa, India stands out as the country which, paved the way for African Union's entry into G20. India stands out as a country which actually stood by them during the COVID, which has actually done this global south. I mean, if global south is today an accepted word, and all of this has happened in the last 10 months, that in the last 10 months, this concept of global south, as I say, it's not just entered the lexicon of diplomacy, it's entered the conscience of nations, that people appreciate. They buy into it, and I think for me, it's one of the key outcomes of the New Delhi summit.
One of the other big outcomes, not directly in the G20 but on the sidelines, was the announcement about the India, Mid-East, Europe economic corridor. Now, some are calling this like a boat and rail initiative to take on China's BRI, or in some ways the old spice route being revived to take on the Silk Route. So all the policy wonks are having a field day there. But is this in some ways an attempt to push back at the BRI? And how do you ensure that the projects that are built don't end up as white elephants, given that relations between some of these countries that are involved in this corridor are actually fraught and could change at some point in time in the future?
Well, look, my first comment would be that the project stands on its own merits. I really don't think everything needs to be compared with China. I mean, China does its thing; it's welcome to do it. But I think I as India don't have to do things because China is doing something. I as India have my interests, my rights, my ambitions, my opportunities, and my friendships. So you see all of this today in play. So what is it we are trying to do? We are really looking today at a favorable geopolitical landscape and trying to do something which the world of commerce has done for 2000 years, which is to take two very important parts of the global economy, Europe and India, or should I say India and Europe, in that order actually. And I mean, this was there. I mean, it's not something new. I mean, you read Roman history, you read Mauryan history. Even when people talked about the fall of Constantinople, essentially blocked the land route from where? From India to Europe. Okay. If you look at this whole idea of Vasco da Gama and Bartholomew Dias, history we learned at school. What was it about? It was a bunch of Europeans trying to find a way to India. Okay. So in that sense, I mean, Indians should realize we actually have been at the center of the world. Much of the world actually did things in search of a route to India. I mean, of which discovering America was one of them. So for me, this has a very fundamental, centuries-old relevance, which is the more routes, better routes, user-friendly routes you can create for movements of goods and possibly people between two big economic centers, with everybody else benefiting on the way. There's an enormous logic to it. Now, could it end up like a white elephant? I don't think so, because I think there's a fundamental sort of viability to it, because if you look at the partners involved, these are all market economies. These are countries, who would, by the very nature of their economy, would make a commercial viability assessment before proceeding on something. And today, the talks which Prime Minister had with the Saudi Crown Prince, I think, reaffirmed a lot of that. So I think it's the joint project of very hard-headed, very practical, very market-based countries who have the comfort to come together as a consortium to take this forward.
Let's spend a moment on the Saudi prince's state visit to India. Stayed back an extra day. Now, the Modi government is unabashed about its Hindutva credentials and yet has been able to wean away countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE from Pakistan's tight embrace. How do you see this evolve from where we've reached?
You know, I would use somewhat different terms, not just as a political correctness, but really as a way, to my mind, of how we are perceived by our partners abroad. I think the Modi government is perceived as more authentically Indian, that these are people, you know, deeply rooted in their culture and traditions and beliefs, and are proud of it, and you know, they are what they seem to be. In a lot of countries, especially in the Gulf, and that's my experience, it actually evokes respect. Because after all, in many countries, they're very comfortable being proud of what they are. So when they see today an India under Modi that is proud to be in Bharat, I think that resonates with them. So,
was there any chatter around Bharat?
In the
G20? Bharat coming
in the G20? Yes, I mean, I won't say there's chatter, but some of the participants, some of the leaders, some of the ministers, when we were meeting and talking about it, and it made sense to a lot of them, because remember, in many cases, I cannot right now quantify it, but I can give you numerous examples of countries who have a certain word which is used by foreigners to describe them, or which they use when dealing with the world, you can say, and words which
exonym and endonym, right?
Huh?
Exonyms and endonyms.
Yeah. So you have, let us say, an obvious example is Japan, which is Nippon, or Hungary, which I'm familiar with, which is Majar or Sag. So people use their self-descriptions for themselves, because in many ways it's a very natural, after all, what would I would use a word with which I'm most comfortable. So if I am truly comfortable with my traditions and culture and heritage, I will use a word from that. If I have a discomfort with it, maybe I'll use some other word.
I want to spend a moment on India-Russia, because when you took the position that we won't condemn the Russia war in the way that Europe and America did, or we'll keep buying oil from Russia, it was thought, okay, Dr. Jaishankar in India going to get into trouble with the rest of the world, because that's an oddball position to take given the conception that Europe and America had. In the end, you seem to have been able to pull off a very fine balancing line.
Rahul would explain it by saying that by being honest about our interests, about our views, about the nature of our relationships with different countries, I think people accepted it. Because had we tried to be clever or duplicitous or evasive, I'm not sure. I think we would have, in fact, landed ourselves in much greater complication. So to me, it was important from the very start to explain to the world that, look, we have our relationship with Russia. That's the history of the relationship. This is how we see it. This is the popular societal perception of it. This is the government assessment of it. This is our strategic view of it. And when it came to the energy markets, actually, it was less an advocacy of buying Russian oil. It was more an advocacy of don't constrict the oil markets. That If you tighten the oil markets beyond a point, it will have catastrophic consequences. And I mean, I would say the history of the last year has borne that out. So today a lot of people, do see what we did as the sensible course of action. I think they respect us more for being transparent about it. So in many ways, by being who we are, by expressing our views and interests in an open but constructive manner, by trying to find middle ground, I think all these were actually inputs into how people reacted when crunch time came at G20.
Finally, President Xi didn't come. Were you disappointed? In the end, it didn't matter. We still have a declaration, but India, China?
Look, a number of people have asked me that question, and the G20 at the end of the day is a set of countries. Okay. Now, it's for each country to make its calculation about the level of its presence. So, whether that country or any other country, I mean, if in retrospect they think, okay, maybe I was better served or not that well served by being there, that's their judgment. As far as I'm concerned, there were 20 member states. The 20 member states were there. We actually, this has been, I've been doing G20s, barring one when I was not in the government, since Antalya in 2015. And I would say, in all honesty, this is not a self-serving statement. This has been the most substantive G20. Just look, forget the verbiage, all the excitement about it. Today, we have actually brought the globe, the focus on Global South, very badly needed. We have today shown the spotlight on the fact that sustainable development goals have fallen behind, and we need an action plan to do it. We have actually highlighted the need for a Green Development Pact, and that you need, there's no point talking about sustainability and the environment if you're not prepared to resource it. Now, to resource it, we have also pushed for a reform of the multilateral development banks. And the idea, and again, this G20, I think, was very, very powerful in terms of highlighting the digital public infrastructure. And, in many ways, you spoke about the chatter. I would say the maximum chatter there was actually about Chandrayaan.
Really?
Yeah. It came up in almost...
Give an extra spring to your step?
I think it gave an extra spring to the entire nation's step. Look, in some way, almost every leader in their remarks, in their interactions, it's had a huge kind of, I would say, their mind space today. It's really kind of pinged that radar.
And the timing was perfect.
Well, we were fortunate.
How many hours of sleep have you been getting? I spoke to Amitabh Kant. He was looking forward to playing some golf. What's your jam? How do you get off the G20 treadmill?
Well, I don't play golf, so my let us say my time requirements are less. No, it's been
You play squash, right?
Yeah. For everybody, it's been it's obviously it always happens when you are close to the finishing line that you push yourself, but it was I would say more than even caffeine, it was the adrenaline. The adrenaline keeps you going till you get it, and I think you can see that that picture where Prime Minister says that
and good news coming in.
Yes. So I think you just need to look at our facial expressions. I think it will answer your
question. That's when you do like a mental fist bump and think, okay, we got this done.
Yeah.
This has been a delightful conversation. We had Borge Brande of the World Economic Forum speak about G3 in the next 10 years. We're still some distance away from that. The US, China, and India possibly defining the new global order. But this has been very significant, as you said, in terms of India's coming of age on the global stage, Prime Minister Modi rising in stature and really sending a message from India, not just to the global south but to the world at large. And history will mark the theorist and the practice, and you are showing, Dr. Jaishankar, a new India way. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The former Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister has been sent to 14-day judicial custody by an anti-corruption bureau court on Sunday evening. While TDP workers, on the other hand, held a hunger strike protesting against the verdict. Andhra Pradesh Minister Roja celebrated the verdict alongside YSRCP cadres by bursting crackers and distributing sweets at her residence. Naidu was questioned for nearly 10 hours at the CID office in Kunchanapalli. Naidu was then taken to the Government General Hospital at 3:40 a.m. for medical tests before being taken back to the SIT's office. The alleged scam is said to have taken place in the State Skill Development Corporation during the TDP's regime from 2014 to 2019. The CID has alleged that 371 crore rupees of government funds were transferred to shell companies while seeking his remand for further investigation.
Whether it is India, whether it is NDA, whether it is Pawan Kalyan or whether it is some other party, the case should be seen at this level, and Chandrababu Naidu is the main culprit and he enjoyed the public money of 371 crores and he should be punished for this.
Naidu's lawyers argue that Naidu is falsely implicated in the case for political gains. They claim that the alleged offences against Naidu related to policy decision was approved by the state cabinet and they couldn't question the government's decisions.
నన్ను అరెస్ట్ చేసి చేస్తారు, నా మీద దాడి కూడా చేస్తారు. ఒకటి కాదు, ఎన్ని అరాచకాలు చేయాలో వాళ్ళు చేసే తప్పులన్నీ మన మీద పెట్టి నేను నిప్పులాగా బ్రతికా. మీరు గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవాలా, 45 సంవత్సరాలుగా ఎవ్వరూ ధైర్యం చేసి నా మీద కేసు పెట్టలేదంటే ఎక్కడా సాక్ష్యాధారాలు కానీ ఎవిడెన్స్ లేవు. 26 ఎంక్వైరీలు వేశాడు రాజశేఖర్. ఏం చేశాడు? ఏం చేయలేకపోయాడు.
Meanwhile, Jansena Party President Pawan Kalyan was taken into preventive custody on Saturday for protesting against Naidu's arrest. Pawan Kalyan initially claimed that he was headed towards his party office, but he was dramatically stopped by the Andhra Pradesh police while he was making his way to Vijayawada. His flight wasn't allowed to take off. He then took by road, and while he was on his way, the police stopped him. Eventually, Pawan Kalyan tried to walk on foot before he was detained.
Their intention is purely not to let any opposition parties to survive and to scare them, to scare the cadre. So we are looking as a part of that. So there is no need to stop me, no need to deny permission for my flight to take off, and there is no need for it.
Naidu's arrest ahead of the assembly polls next year has raised questions about the timing of this crackdown. Bureau Report, India Today.
I've read the Gita, I've read number of the Upanishads, I've read many Hindu books. There's nothing Hindu about what the BJP does. From no learned Hindu person have I ever heard that you should terrorize, harm people who are weaker than you. I've never read this.
Hello and welcome. One of the key thrusts of India's G20 presidency has been the urgent need to reform multilateral development banks. And the World Bank features very prominently in the Delhi Declaration. President Biden putting in a lot of effort to try and ensure that more funds are available with the World Bank, and the manner in which the World Bank's been operating for the past several decades changes. And the man entrusted to do this job is one of our own, Ajay Banga. Mr. Banga, welcome to India today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You know, I noticed when the Prime Minister was introducing you to the Sabarmati Ashram image, which is at the back, you say, oh, I've been there. You know, so the moment that happens, you get the sense, okay, here's one of our own who's now risen to the position of the World Bank chief, and we've been wanting to do this interview for a while, so we're very thankful that you could finally take out time.
I'm glad to be here. In fact, I have been to Sabarmati back in the days of being in IIM, so it's a long time ago.
Yeah, you
I actually went back
there.
only once after that, but I love going there.
I want to start by asking you about your mission to reform the World Bank. So we'll come to the Delhi Declaration and the G20. Do you want to give our viewers at the outset, you know, what you've set out as your mission objectives, given the World Bank's original priorities in terms of poverty alleviation, to try and bringing it in to dealing with climate finance, to dealing with food security and the various issues which are very here and now at this moment?
So, you know, my view got informed a great deal by the 3 months between being a nominee and actually getting elected. In those 3 months, I got a chance to meet 93 different countries, the leaders or the finance ministers who I was able to be in touch with. And I met civil society, and I met a number of private sector companies, asset managers and the like. And that gave me a really good perspective. And I'm going to give you a distilled version of how that led to what I'm thinking. The first thing I learned was that the idea of somehow segregating, you know, fighting poverty and shared prosperity on the one hand, separating it from climate or pandemics or fragility and refugees or food insecurity or biodiversity, these things don't make any sense because in fact these are intertwined crises. And when you grow up like we've done in India, you realize very quickly that if you don't have enough rainfall, you don't have 2 crops, then you don't have the cattle because you can't afford them, you lose your dairy income, then you lose the farm labor, and you bring your child back from school to work with you. When you do that, this gain you made in poverty over decades of getting the girl child in particular to go to school gets reversed over the course of a few years of lack of rainfall. So that was one big, deep comprehension. The second one was that people feel nervous about what climate change means. So when the Western world speaks about climate, they're speaking mostly about the emissions-heavy growth of the past. When the developing world speaks about climate, yes, that's interesting because it's important, but it's also about soil degradation, biodiversity, lack of rainfall, heat-resistant varieties of seeds, catastrophes like hurricanes and floods, and you know, so it's almost a different lexicon, and you have to be careful because one and the other are both required. What you cannot tell the developing world is that I'm going to focus on climate change, whichever of the 2 types, at the cost of giving you a school for girls or a health center. So that's the second big thing. Careful about not recognizing the trade-offs that need to be made. And when you put this together, what we're trying to do is to do 3 things in the evolution roadmap of the bank, prompted by the G20 before I came in. And the first is to get a new vision and mission. So the vision is going to go from just poverty and prosperity to say, we want to create a world free of poverty on a livable planet. That livable planet allows us to widen the aperture through which we look at the world, to include climate, to include pandemics, to include, you know, fragility and food insecurity. So you can dedicate your resources to the intertwined nature of these challenges. The second thing we've done is to make it inclusive. And what do I mean by inclusive? Everybody has spoken about inclusion to include marginalized people. I think that's really important. But let's just remember that half the world's population, females, women, are still not able to access the same opportunities that a man does. Whether it is in labor force participation rates, or it is in their income for the same work done, or it is in social development and social status. And by the way, this is true of the developed world as it is true in the developing world. So I'm focusing on women and young people because young people are the energy of the developing world, and we got to give them, quality of life and a job. So that's kind of the first big thing we're driving.
So while you've studied finance and economics, you're not a classical macro global economist in the traditional way.
No,
right?
I'm far from it.
You're a corporate executive, hotshot, high-flying corporate executive.
I don't know about all that.
Now brought in to run the World Bank. Many think it's an advantage. Obviously, President Biden thought it's an advantage. And some would say, how are you going to make the transition from running MasterCard to actually running the World Bank? Like, how are you making this transition in terms of what you're trying to get done?
No, look, some things are very common. Clarity of vision, simplicity of speaking to it, repeating it many times to everybody so they all get it and walk with you together. Processes of management, measure what you want to work on, have simple scorecards, not 158 items, but a few. These are things I'm doing at the bank that aren't unique to either the private sector or the World Bank. I think I was lucky in my years in corporate life in Citibank and MasterCard. I got involved with financial inclusion. I got involved with the US-India business relationship. I got involved with a cyber commission for President Obama. I worked on trade policy. So there's a little bit of me that has a little bit of exposure to this other world other than the private sector. But you know what? It's still a big challenge. And the good news is the bank has amazing people. So when you walk into the bank and you sit with people and you spend just 10 minutes asking them about their background, you will get the most amazing stories of people, how they grew up and how they've reached where they have, and their unbelievable level of education and knowledge. You harness that and you put it in the correct direction. And I think the bank is still a very potent instrument of change and development.
So this Delhi Declaration has a direct reference to the World Bank, and it talks about reforming the
more than one day,
MDB.
more than one reference.
And making this a better bank. So do you want to talk a bit about how this G20 was for you? Because apart from working on sustainable development goals, reforming multilateral development banks has really been one of the key thrusts of India's G20 presidency. So how do you hope to deliver on that?
So I think this whole reform of MDBs has been part of the G20 evolution framework. And India really took it on and said, let's get something done during our year. And my view has been that for a guy who's new to the institution, who sees the need for change, this is like getting wind in your sails, because you get people contributing their thinking. You have to be careful to listen to everyone, then prioritize what you want to pick on and focus on that. And my focus has been to get to the better bank. And the better bank idea is get the vision and mission right, which we were talking to, then get the right partnerships going for this bank with other MDBs. So I just announced a partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank, focusing on the Amazon, the Caribbean climate situation, and digitized governance. And then, the private sector and its partnerships. We've announced the private sector lab, and actually Chandra of Tata is one of the guys who's volunteered his time to be a part of it. That's to help get more private sector money into renewable energy in the developing market. So kind of better partners. And then the third part of being a better bank is getting better capital, sweating our balance sheet. The loan to equity ratio, hybrid capital, portfolio guarantees, global public goods funds, that kind of stuff, so that we can sweat our balance sheet without losing our AAA rating. If I can do these three things, a clear vision and mission, good partners with a number of people, including crowdsourcing private finance money, and get the right capital work going, I think then we get the right to go back and look for a bigger bank, which is kind of what the NK Singh, Larry Summers.
जिस तरह से प्रधानमंत्री मोदी ने और हिंदुस्तान ने अपने G20 की प्रेसिडेंसी को हैंडल किया है, आप भारतीय मूल के हैं, आप किस तरह से देखते हैं? क्योंकि पीएम का जब हमने इंटरव्यू किया, उन्होंने कहा कि ये G20 की प्रेसिडेंसी एक ग्लोबल ऑर्डर का कैटलिस्ट होना चाहिए, न्यू ग्लोबल ऑर्डर का. आप वॉशिंगटन में रहते हैं, हिंदुस्तान से आए हैं, आप कैसे देखते हैं इसको?
मैं पीएम साहब को बोल रहा था जोकिंगली कि मैं तो मेक इन इंडिया का अल्टीमेट एग्जांपल, क्योंकि मैं यहाँ जमा हूँ, मेरी स्कूलिंग यहाँ थी, कॉलेज यहाँ किया, एमबीए यहाँ किया, मैंने बाहर कोई पढ़ाई नहीं की, मैं ट्रेनिंग कोर्स के तक नहीं गया हूँ आफ्टर मूविंग आउट ऑफ इंडिया. तो अल्टीमेट मेक इन इंडिया एग्जांपल. देखो, माय व्यू इज कि ये जो G20 में व्हाट इंडिया वाज एबल टू डू, ये नॉट ओनली वाज इट ए सक्सेसफुल की डिक्लेरेशन आया, कि कम्युनिके आया, जो लोगों ने कोई पॉसिबिलिटी नहीं दी थी परसों सुबह, वो इंपॉर्टेंट चीज़ है, वो लीडरशिप की अफर्मेशन है. बट आई थिंक मोर देन दैट, इंडिया की जो ग्लोबल पोजिशनिंग और ब्रांडिंग हुई है through this period. कि आपने 60 शहरों में मीटिंग्स कराई हैं. People have been everywhere. You know, हम्पी में शर्पा की मीटिंग थी. This is not normal. And in addition, ये जो digital public infrastructure की जो आपकी effort है, along with a few other countries, this has got noticed. World Bank ने भी एक report बनाई है. So I think India का इसमें benefit है not only of leadership, but also of India's own global image. And I think it has been quite well handled. So
आपको एक इंडियन आइकॉन की तरह देखा जाता है. जैसी ये बात मैंने डाली सोशल मीडिया पे कि मांगा जी का इंटरव्यू कर रहे हैं, कई सारे फैंस ऑफ पंजाब, यू नो, बिकॉज यूर अ सरदार, कई सारे फैंस ऑफ पंजाब ने बोला देखो एक पंजाबी किस तरीके से जाके अब वर्ल्ड बैंक चला रहा है, ग्लोबल इकोनॉमी हैंडल कर रहा है. उसको आप कैसे देखते हैं?
या देखो, मैं आई कीप थिंकिंग कि मैं बहुत खुशकिस्मत हूँ, बिकॉज लाइफ इज 50% लक. वो 50% लक अगर आप सीज करो और उसके साथ कुछ करो तो सक्सेस मिलता है, मगर पहले 50% लक आना चाहिए. आई एम लकी.
But you're also very hardworking and exceedingly sharp.
You have to. That's the other 50%. You have to seize your luck, because otherwise it passes you by like a train on a platform. You have to get onto the train, right, to get somewhere, and preferably be a driver on the train or an engine man on the train. And I use that example all the time, that you have to remember that life is 50% luck. You get that, you seize it, you have to work hard, you have to speak truth, you have to be articulate, you have to be down to earth, you have to remember your roots, you have to be humble, you have to have a sense of humor. These are all important things, but without luck, all of this may not get you there.
You know, you and I have a similarity. We're both Fauji brats. Is that something that helped you in the way that you shaped your career, you think, being born in the Indian Army?
Your values that you get from your family and from your expertise and from your experiences are so important. I have great value. My dad was able to speak to a visiting general with the same level of curiosity as the guard at our gate. And I think the ability to be curious about people and to retain humility, no matter what you've achieved, is a very important part of being a human being. You know, there is no bigger achievement than people remembering you for not only what you did, but how you did it.
You have done many big things in your life. You have a very key mission. We'll track how it goes. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Really appreciate you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All the very best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
राहुल गांधी के सामने गीता पढ़ लेना काफ़ी नहीं है, गीता को समझना भी चाहिए. गीता कोई हिंदू ग्रंथ नहीं है, वो धार्मिक ग्रंथ है. वह जीवन पद्धति कैसे ठीक हो, हमारी जीवन शैली कैसे ठीक हो, वह वैसा ग्रंथ है. उपनिषद भी हमको धर्म की ओर ले जाते हैं, ना कि किसी पंथ से जोड़ते हैं. असल में क्या है कि उनको धर्म और पंथ का फ़र्क पता नहीं, इसलिए वो बार बार इस प्रकार की बात करते हैं. परंतु उनको ये भी याद रखना कि उन्हीं की पार्टी के लोग आज से कुछ साल पहले तक हिंदू टेरर की बात करते थे, सेफ्रन टेरर की बात करते थे, हिंदू आतंकवादी हैं ऐसी चर्चाएं करते थे, ऐसी घोषणाएं करते थे. तो वे अपना मत स्पष्ट करें कि उनका मत क्या है.
सनातन धर्म पे विपक्ष को अपनी चुप्पी तोड़नी चाहिए. सनातन धर्म का अपमान क्यों, और एक के बाद दूसरा विपक्ष का नेता जिसका चेहरा भ्रष्टाचार से भरा, वो केवल सनातन धर्म के अपमान तक सीमित हो गए हैं. और ये दिखाता है कि उनकी मानसिकता क्या है और कैसे सनातन धर्म को एक के बाद दूसरा एक से बड़ा अपशब्द बोलने के लिए लगातार प्रयास जारी है.
Weather forecast now. Delhi, maximum 32 and minimum 24 degrees. Mumbai, maximum 31 and minimum 26 degrees. Kolkata, maximum 34 and minimum 26 degrees. Bangalore, maximum 28 and minimum 20 degrees. Chennai, maximum 34 and minimum 28 degrees. Hyderabad, maximum 29 and minimum 22 degrees.
All political parties traveling from different parts.
Armed with facts,
Looking at political back.
she takes the news by its horns.
Do you think the future of these students are not hampered?
Fierce, bold, and direct, setting the tone for the biggest stories from every corner and every angle. Expect nothing but the unfiltered truth.
News first, niceties later. Watch me, Nabila Jamal, on India Today.
Rishi Sunak, the first UK Prime Minister of an Indian origin, is also a proud Hindu. The British Prime Minister, who was spotted wearing Rakhis during the G20 summit, visited the Akshardham temple in Delhi along with his wife Akshita Murthy on Sunday. Sunak, who arrived in India on Friday for the 18th G20 summit, expressed his deep connect to Hinduism.
Yeah, so I'm a proud Hindu, and that's how I was raised. That's how I am. And yes, we've just had Raksha Bandhan, so from my sister and my cousins, I have all my Rakhis, and you know, I didn't have time to celebrate Janmashtami properly. It's something that is important to me. I think faith is something that helps everybody who has faith in their lives.
The couple, who were received by Union Minister Ashwini Kumar Chaubey on Friday, were greeted with Jai Siya Ram. They were also gifted Rudraksh, a copy of Bhagavad Gita and a Hanuman Chalisa.
Jai Siya Ram.
This isn't the first time Sunak has openly embraced Hinduism. He had visited the Hindu spiritual leader Murari Bapu in Cambridge for his 921st recital, titled Manas Vishwavidyalaya.
इतनी सबल राजपीठ पर बैठे हुए होते ही इतनी सरलता मैंने कम राजनेताओं में देखी है। जिस तरह वो गए और बच्चों से मिल रहे थे, लोगों को मिल रहे थे, ये जो है, ये उसका बहुत बहुत अच्छा पहलू है।
And what I see Bapu does each day of his life.
Sunak addressed a gathering of people of Indian origin. He said his faith guides him in every aspect of his life.
Always be an inspirational figure.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful.
After the 2017 general elections, he swore his oath to Parliament upon the sacred Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita. As per British media reports, Sunak always keeps an idol of Sri Ganesh on his table. He earlier made an appeal to give up eating beef and claimed he has consumed it. Sunak was also seen performing Gau Puja in London. The video, which went viral, was shot when the 42-year-old visited a cow enclosure along with his wife Akshita Murthy, the daughter of Infosys founder N.R. Narayana Murthy. A practitioner of Hinduism and the first British Prime Minister, of Indian descent. Sunak is not leaving his culture and values behind. Bureau Report, India Today.
Co-presented by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
Co-presented by JK Tyre Ranger Series. Stay wild at heart. Co-powered by PolicyBazaar.com. Her family hogi insured. Co-powered by the bold look of Kohler.